Today we're speaking with one of Canada and the world's most prominent environmental activists, Tzeporah Berman. Originally studying something other than environmentalism. You were studying like fashion design or something like that, right?
I was. Right out of high school I was in fashion arts design.
And yet you kind of switched course and you've been on this course ever since. So what would you say are sort of the inspiration behind that environmental activism and your first foray into this world?
Well, there was this nagging feeling throughout the time that I was in fashion arts design. I mean, part of me loved it. It was fun, it was interesting, it was engaging, and there was this nagging feeling like I was missing something, like I should be doing something. And my first summer after my first year, I went to Europe, backpacking around with my sister. And that was that was in the very early 90s, was it? No, it was 1989. And that was a year that people were literally dropping like flies on the streets in many cities across Europe because of air pollution.
Right.
So I was in Athens, and one of my dreams, I had been studying art history, one of my dreams was to see the Acropolis. And we went up to the Acropolis, and it was before the restoration. It was literally eroding with the acid from the air. We looked down on Athens and it was just this yellow cloud. And I remember getting to my hostel and doing this, and there was just this black streak across my face, and I was coughing up black goo. And I just thought, oh my God, this is not okay. We left Athens and we thought, we're going to go hike somewhere beautiful. And we ended up in a forest in the Harz Mountains that is entirely dead and left standing as a testimony to acid rain and the impact of industrial society. And those two things had a massive impact on me. And I came back home and it was like my eyes had opened to environmental issues in a serious way for the first time, and then I couldn't see anything else.
And that's all you sort of focused on from then on in. How many years have you been involved in the environmental movement, not only in Canada but internationally at this point?
25.
25 years. Could you think to yourself, what is the proudest moment? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot, but even maybe one or two of the moments that really, really make you proud as someone who's worked so hard in this field, what you achieved.
For me, two moments really stand out. One is when the British Columbia government announced the permanent protection of the Great Bear Rainforest on British Columbia's west coast, and the creation of a new conservation financing initiative that would support local communities and First Nations so that they weren't forced to decide between poverty and clear-cut logging their territory, that they had other options. And so I had been working on that for 10 years. And when we started that campaign, we were called crazy. We were called eco-terrorists. I was called, every name in the book, that I was trying to destroy British Columbia's economy. I remember this big headline, Greenpeace, will these people wreck BC, above the fold in the newspaper. And it took us a long time to create a really informed conversation to show that there were options. And then there was a moment where there was the Premier of British Columbia standing with First Nations chiefs and the logging industry and the environmental groups, announcing a new way of designing the economy and scaling up conservation past what anyone ever thought possible.
That's amazing. And a lot of the movement at the beginning, I think, seemed more into the civil disobedience, right? The Clayoquot sound was considered one of Canada's largest civil disobedience movements, right? Was there an evolution of tactics for you in terms of how to approach environmental activism over the years? I mean, since, that's how it began with the civil disobedience. Anything that has changed and lessons learned for you as an activist?
Well, I think for me as a very young person getting into this work and being very outraged by what I was seeing, the protests, the rallies, the blockades, they felt right, speaking truth to power, we're just going to stop this. And I learned over the years that, the harder work is trying to figure out solutions, because solutions are messy. They're not perfect. And to figure out solutions, you do need those protests. You need those rallies. You need those blockades, because they create the power. They create the problem decision makers have to solve. But you also need to be willing to sit down across the table with who I thought of back then as my enemies. Industry and government, because actually they have the knowledge and capacity to solve the problem. So if you actually want to campaign and not just complain, you need to sit down and work out the solutions. So I think my work evolved from, in that scenario, in the forest work, from blockades to boycotts, working in the marketplace to create financial pressure and corporate campaigns, to sitting down in the boardrooms and working out solutions. But I wouldn't say that means that now I understand you just need to sit in the boardrooms.
Right.
Because I think you need all three. I think you need to have the controversy, you need people in the street, especially now in the climate era. We need people to stand up and say, this is not okay. And to create that controversy, those headlines, and, so decision makers realize they have to solve it. And then we also need people who are willing to do the hard work of working out the solutions and sitting in those boardrooms.
And do you think that your place right now, today, as you look back and as you look forward, where is your place in that, the grassroots, the sitting in the boardroom, the, policy perhaps?
It's in both places.
Yeah.
I think as someone who's done this work for a long time, who can sit in the boardrooms and wear a suit, and that it's even more important for me to be standing in front of the coal plant, standing in front of the blocking the new pipeline. And in some ways, it's kind of therapeutic. If you sit and read the science that I read all day long, with the terrifying statistics about the impact of coal and oil development on our climate, we're not safe right now. And we have very little time to turn it around. We have the capacity to turn it around. We now have the technology for a new way of living. We have electric cars, we have solar energy, we have the price of renewables, dropping through the floor. We have the capacity to make the changes that we need to make, but they're not being made. And so I plan to be both on the blockades and in the boardrooms, because I think we need both. And on a personal level, I think we are inspired by working in community and using our voice. What I see today that I didn't see 20, 25 years ago is that these issues are connected. I thought that First Nations treaty rights was a very important issue, but not the issue I was working on. And water scarcity, it's good someone's working on that. I work on forest protection. Climate change. The fact is, these issues are connected, and we cannot address climate change or ocean acidification or forest loss without also simultaneously addressing jobs and justice and treaty rights. Those are issues that are entirely connected, because the solutions are about distributing power in every sense of the word. That's what democracy is about. That's how we'll create a cleaner, just, and livable societies. And it makes the issues more complex, but it also makes the solutions much richer.
And just to take a step from that, do you think you're alone in realizing that, or do you think other people have also adapted that approach in this new age of environmental activism? People working together, seeing the holistic perspective the way you have?
I'm seeing that all around me. I was really lucky to be a part of the climate march in New York last year 400,000 people marched in the streets of New York, and that march was led by unions and frontline communities and indigenous people from around the world. It was a coming together of people from all walks of life, and the conversation there was about climate change, but it was also about jobs and justice, and I'm seeing that every day, and that's making us much stronger, less siloed.
And one other question, with the First Nations community that you mentioned also, do you feel there's more of an openness there to work with other people, with industry, because that always seems to have been, a big part of the struggle in Canada in terms of working together versus in silos? Do you feel there's more of a movement in that respect in type of work?
In a lot of the First Nations communities I work with, in all of them, they're working in some capacity with industry, starting to build relationships with environmental groups. But in almost every First Nations community that I'm working in, they're also faced with huge pressures from industry. These are poor communities, and you have oil companies, gas companies, pipeline companies coming into their community and saying, "What do you need? I'll write a check. You just agree not to oppose these projects."
Right.
And these are communities that need those community halls, those schools, that money to support their communities. So they're being put in a terrible position, and I think it's extremely difficult, but there is a huge willingness to work together to try and solve the issues, and they also realize in a lot of circumstances that they're more powerful if they do.
As far as the challenges, environmental challenges that we face today, and looking back over the 20 years of the types of challenges that we faced before, have they evolved? Are we in any better place? What do you, like you mentioned how it's still pretty dire, but have they changed at all? Have we taken a few steps forward? What would you think about that?
I think that as a society we've gotten better in some ways in recognizing the importance of conservation and protecting the environment in our everyday lives. I think corporations have gotten way better. They have to now. They address these issues. When I first started, and you started talking to a major corporation about an environmental issue, you'd be talking to their public relations office. Now they all have environmental affairs and environmental sustainability offices. They have experts. They have scientists working for them, looking at their impact. So in that respect, we've made progress. But at the same time, we've had a bigger impact on the planet than we ever thought we could have. So it used to be that you were dealing with localized issues in your backyard. It was this logging. It was this toxic effluent into that river. But the cumulative impacts now of our industrial society, primarily of fossil fuel use, we now know is affecting the climate everywhere. That's affecting forest loss on the entire planet. That's acidifying our oceans. That's affecting how much drinking water we have, whether a dramatic increase in floods, droughts, and extreme weather. The situation that we're in right now is much more serious than anything I think many of us ever imagined. And so we've come a long way. We've come a long way in designing technologies, and we now have the capacity to make the changes that we need to make. But we also are facing much graver issues at a much larger scale than I ever imagined we would be.
And your focus today is where? What would you describe specifically what you're doing today?
I'm working on trying to stop the expansion of some of the dirtiest fuels, like the Canadian oil sands, and to ensure that we don't build more fossil fuel infrastructure like pipelines, but instead start investing in that cleaner technology, in renewable energy, in solar energy, in wind energy, in electric vehicles, in public transportation. Those are the solutions that we need. And that will also stimulate our economy and create safer, clean jobs for people at home. We have a generation of Canada's children who are watching the skies, waiting for mom and dad to get home from Fort Mac. And so this is not just about fossil fuels, it's about safe jobs. I mean, one of the great things about windmills is they don't explode, right? A solar spill is actually just a sunny day. This is about safer, cleaner jobs at home where people live, and not building those mega industrial projects that are polluting our air, our water, and creating an unsafe climate. So it really is about a new kind of economy.
And just one last thing, I was curious, if you were looking back at the young person that you were when you started off in this field, would there be any advice you would give her in terms of how, what she should do to take the best, most effective steps forward?
I think the most important thing that we can do is listen and then act. We need to listen to ourselves, to that little voice that says, it's not okay. Actually, what I really want to be working on is this. Because we do our best work in the world when we're listening to that voice, when we're being true to ourselves. But I think also listening to others, to really see people and not just positions. Because that's how we'll create the relationships and the trust and the solutions across divides. But if we just talk it out, it can lead to a lot of navel gazing. A lot of people are what I call issue swimmers. They know a lot, and they're righter than right, and they spend every day reading more and more and more. But what are you doing? What are you doing to create a conversation? What are you doing to create an event? Are you actually talking to a decision maker? We live at a moment in our history that requires us to act. And I want to be able to look at my grandchildren and tell them that I did everything I can. And I think most people do too.
Perfect. Thank you.